What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the site. Today we're going to be covering a video on protein intake. So essentially looking at how much protein we want to take in across our day of eating, and how we want to split that protein intake up across the day. So what food sources, which we've kind of already covered in the what food should we be eating to build muscle video, but also looking at sort of how frequently we want to eat that. So how do we break X amount of daily intake protein across the meals that we choose to eat? Now, coming into this video, there is a presumed understanding of kind of what protein is and why we want to use it. So I'm not going to sit here and spend 3 to 4 minutes explaining that, hey, this is what protein is and this is why we need it. If you don't know that, then to be honest, you can probably find it within 60 seconds on Google. Should you still require further information, drop me a message to the Instagram that's on the screen. I'd be more than happy to help with that. So, digging right in then, the presumed sort of, or the general consensus across the literature at the moment, or in fact, to be fair, that has been around for a very long time, is the old 1 gram per pound of body weight, or 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight of protein. I really like that. I think that that is a fantastic ballpark estimate for how much protein you should take in, because for a large percentage of the population that is more than sufficient protein. It's incredibly easy to remember and incredibly easy to apply to your personal situation. You step on a scale and mimic the number it says with grams of protein. So I think not only is it very easy to comply to, but it also is sufficient in most cases. Now, looking more at targeted individuals, the kind of individuals that I would anticipate are going to be watching these videos, we can kind of tailor that literature and almost sort of select our search terms within the literature to aid more trained individuals with, more sort of hypertrophy kind of goals. And for individuals within that category, we would be looking at sort of 1 to 1.2 grams per pound. So ever so slightly above. Now, that's not to say that 1 gram is no longer sufficient and you won't make gains on 1 gram per pound. You absolutely will. But if we can, potentially get a little bit more benefit from slightly increasing our protein, that's something we should consider seriously. So whilst I think that 1 gram or 1 to 1.2 gram per pound of total body weight is a great ratio for calculating protein intake, I do think that we can be more specific with this, and we can use what I would like to call lean body mass or fat-free mass, or essentially the amount that you weigh with your body fat or fat mass deducted. So essentially, if you're 180 pounds and you are 10% body fat, you would remove 18 pounds and you would be 162, and that would be the amount that you use to calculate your protein intake from. Because we know that if you're leaner, you can generally push your protein a little bit higher. So how can we put some figures on that? Well, I actually think that Jeff Nippard has a fantastic scale, and his sliding kind of, what would we call it, I guess, a sliding model, I think he actually calls it, where he looks at sort of 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound of lean body mass. I think that's a fantastic scale. It's more accurate, and it will also push protein higher. And if you value your progress based on what I've said earlier, in the sense that we can probably achieve more hypertrophy benefit from a slightly higher protein intake, we'd probably want to take that on board and run with a lean body mass based ratio. Plus, we also know from the modern literature that it's very unlikely that we will see any adverse effects from a high protein intake, and also it's unlikely to accumulate more body fat when protein intake is higher, due to the fact that we don't really store it. And we'll come on to that a little bit later when we come on to my personal suggestions with protein intake. So, once we've established our protein intake, let's say 200 grams, do we eat 200 grams in one serving and then sit around eating carbs and fat all day? Or do we break it into 2 servings of 100 gram? Well, whilst you can theoretically do anything you like with the breakdown of your protein intake, we can see more or less benefit based on how we structure that protein across the day. So if we envision it on a graph, which I think is a really simple way of visualizing this throughout the day, we want our protein intake to kind of be like this throughout the day and see many different ups and downs across the day when we feed. Instead of seeing a huge bolus of protein and then nothing for a few hours and then another little one before bed, and then we want to see it continually stimulating muscle protein synthesis throughout the day. So small, frequent boluses of protein every time we eat. Now, How frequently that should be is going to be entirely dependent on, well, many factors. One of the key ones being how much food you're eating, of course, and your preference. But I think somewhere in the realm of kind of 3 to maybe 7 or 8, if you're a super big guy eating a lot of food and you like to break your meals up into smaller, more frequent serving sizes, then 3 to 8 meals throughout the day, or 3 to 8 servings, I should say. So this is inclusive of maybe, a protein shake or your intra-workout aminos. 3 to 8 servings throughout the day would be more than sufficient. So you may say, well, why? Why do we want to break it up into more frequent, smaller serving sizes? Why don't we just eat it in one large bolus? Because we know that we can absorb unlimited amounts of protein. Keyword being absorb, not necessarily utilizing for the building or repairing of muscle tissue. So if we are in a big period of inactivity almost in terms of protein intake, in the sense of we've had a huge increase, then we've had a decrease, and obviously then we've kind of seen nothing for a few hours. In this period here where we've seen no protein intake, not only are we going to be seeing kind of a huge amount of muscle protein breakdown, but also in this period where we did see a lot of protein, we're potentially going to see quite a large amount of wasted protein. Not because we don't absorb it, because as we know, we can absorb whatever protein we intake near enough. But we're not going to be utilizing that for what we want to use it for, which, as we know, the building, the repairing of muscle tissue, muscle protein synthesis. That is why we want to take protein on in smaller yet more frequent servings throughout the day. It's also really important to remember that we want to get this protein in through the form of a full amino acid profile. So things such as whey or hydrolyzed whey, and obviously whole foods. We don't want to just be continually having things like amino acids or things like that aren't going to maximally stimulate MPS. So you may then think, well, why do so many people have amino acids? Well, the reason for an amino acid is to be able to take advantage of the easily digestible nature of it not being a complete protein. So in and around the workout window, there's huge benefit to that. But throughout any other point in the day, I'd rather see you having a complete protein source. Now, in addition to all the points that I've made, there is something that we really have to remember, and that is, as boring as it is to repeatedly say this in almost every video, the individualistic nature to this variable. And that is based on so many factors. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The size of the individual. If you are a much bigger individual with much more muscle mass, you are going to require much more protein per meal. So the 20 gram consensus per meal may be nearer to 40 or 50 gram if you're a very big individual with a lot of muscle tissue. If you're a smaller individual, you may be more at the 20 gram mark. And obviously throughout the regular feedings, that's going to accumulate a higher or lower total protein intake for the day. The age, anabolic resistance will be at play for this factor, and we have to remember that as you get older, you're going to be less efficient at digesting, absorbing and utilizing protein. So you will probably need to take on a little bit more as you get older. The phase that you're in. If you are in a phase of body we would call it competition prep, or some of you guys may know it as kind of dieting or cutting, essentially when you're trying to improve composition or get a bit leaner, the consensus here would be more protein to hold on to more muscle tissue, but I would actually argue for more protein in an off-season as well, or a bulking phase, or a gaining phase, or a growing phase, or whatever you want to call it. And the reason for that would be, as we know from the literature that I went through earlier, we're probably going to be able to reduce or limit the amount of fat that we can gain, because we can increase calories higher without really seeing the fat gain because of the fact that we won't store protein. So there's going to be things to consider in terms of the phase. Another thing to consider, the split. If you are on a training split where you are being very, very focused and isolated with your muscle groups, so maybe you're doing a bro split where you'll do just chest and triceps or just back and biceps, you will need less protein to recover from that session. Whereas if you have come off the back of an upper-lower split or a full body split even, you've hit how many different muscle groups there, so you are going to then require more protein following that session to recover, repair and build muscle tissue. So there is a lot that we have to consider. And to kind of wrap it all up, 1 gram per pound of body weight is sufficient. If you are a lean individual with the goal of building muscle tissue, you can probably push this a little bit higher, nearer to maybe the 1.2 gram per pound mark. We want to get this protein in regular servings throughout the day from a complete protein source. So there is my thoughts on protein, guys. You can see that we're just sort of covering this variable in its simplest form. If you have any questions further to what we've touched on here, my Instagram is on the screen. We also go into lots more detail on protein intake specifically, and we actually help you calculate your protein goal based within our ebook, our nutrition ebook. in as an addition of the fundamental series of ebooks, which you can find linked in the description on our website. Check it out, and we'll see you in the next video.